My own son looked me in the eye and said the words that cut deeper than my divorce papers ever could. Comfort? You should have stayed married. I was 52, homeless, and sleeping on his couch. But what happened next? Nobody saw coming. Not even me. If you've ever felt like your world completely crumbled overnight, this story is for you. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sarah, and if this is your first time here, I share real stories about life's unexpected turns and how we find our strength when everything falls apart. Today's story isn't easy to tell, but it's one that changed everything for me. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was divorced, financially devastated, and my relationship with my son was hanging by a thread. But sometimes, rock bottom becomes the solid foundation you need to build something incredible. Before we dive in, if stories of resilience and second chances resonate with you, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Your support means the world to me, and it helps these stories reach people who might need to hear them most. Let me take you back to March 15, 2021. I remember the date exactly because it's when my 25-year marriage officially ended. Not just on paper, but the day I had to pack my life into garbage bags and leave the house I'd called home for 2 decades. You see, during the divorce proceedings, I discovered that the house we'd built together was entirely in my ex-husband's name. 25 years of marriage, and legally, I had no claim to the home where I'd raised our son, hosted countless family dinners, and created what I thought were unbreakable memories. The settlement was, let's just say, it wasn't in my favor. My ex-husband had been planning this divorce longer than I realized, and he'd been strategic about protecting his assets. Meanwhile, I'd been the classic supportive wife. I'd given up my career in marketing 15 years earlier to focus on our family and support his growing business. So there I was, 52 years old, with a resume that had a 15-year gap, a bank account with barely enough for a security deposit, and nowhere to go. The job market wasn't exactly welcoming to women my age trying to re-enter the workforce, especially in a field that had evolved so dramatically during my absence. I reached out to my son, Michael. He was 23, fresh out of college, working his first real job, and living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment across town. I'll never forget that phone call. Mom, I guess you can crash on my couch for a while. But this is temporary, okay? I'm not running a halfway house here. His words stung, but I understood. I was his mother asking for help, and that dynamic shift was uncomfortable for both of us. I thought maybe once I got there, once he saw how hard I was trying to get back on my feet, things would soften between us. Living on my son's couch was humbling in ways I never expected. Every morning, I'd fold up my blankets and try to make myself invisible while he got ready for work. Every evening, I'd wait until he was settled before I could even think about relaxing. But the worst part wasn't the physical discomfort. It was watching my son's resentment grow day by day. He'd make little comments about the apartment being crowded, about having to tiptoe around his own space, about how his dating life was suffering because he couldn't bring anyone home. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd been there about 6 weeks, and I was job hunting during the day, doing interviews over video calls from coffee shops because I didn't want to disturb Michael's work from home schedule. I'd just gotten another rejection email, probably the 30th one, and I was sitting on that couch, just staring at my laptop screen. Michael came home from work, saw me there looking defeated, and something in him just snapped. "Mom, can we talk?" he said, but his tone wasn't gentle. It was frustrated, almost angry. I closed my laptop. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" He stood there for a moment, running his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "This isn't working, Mom. This whole situation, it's not working. I know it's not ideal," I started, "but I'm really trying to find." "Are you?" he interrupted. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're pretty comfortable here. You've got a place to sleep, someone else paying the bills, no real responsibilities." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Michael, that's not fair. I'm actively job hunting every single day." "For jobs you don't really want," he shot back. "You turn down anything that doesn't pay what you think you deserve. Anything that's beneath your old lifestyle. Maybe if you'd thought about comfort before, you would have stayed married." The silence that followed was deafening. My own son had just told me that I should have endured an unhappy marriage for the sake of financial security, that my desire for basic dignity and comfort was somehow selfish or unearned. I stared at him for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. This young man standing in front of me, I'd given up everything to raise him, to support his dreams, to make sure he never wanted for anything. And now he was telling me I should have sacrificed my happiness and self-respect to avoid being a burden to him. "You think I should have stayed married?" I asked quietly. "I think you should have thought about the consequences before you decided to blow up our family," he said. The coldness in his voice was something I'd never heard before. "Blow up our family?" I stood up then, my own anger finally rising to meet his. "Michael, your father was having an affair. For 3 years. With his business partner's wife. I found out by accidentally seeing texts on his phone when he asked me to check his messages while he was driving." His face changed slightly, but he didn't back down. "So you couldn't work it out? Go to counseling? Fight for your marriage?" I tried. The words came out louder than I intended. I begged him to go to counseling. I asked him to end the affair. I gave him 6 months to choose, and he chose her. What was I supposed to do? Stay and watch him continue to betray everything we'd built together? "You were supposed to think about more than just yourself," he said. "You were supposed to think about me, about our family, about the fact that some things are worth fighting for even when they're hard." That's when it hit me. Michael wasn't just angry about the couch situation. He was angry about the divorce itself. He blamed me for ending his childhood fantasy of having the perfect family, even though that family had been built on lies. I sat back down on that couch, my temporary bed, my current reality. And I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was 23, but in that moment, he seemed much younger. He was a kid whose world had been shattered, and he needed someone to blame. "Michael," I said softly, "sit down. Please." He hesitated, then sat in his armchair, the one that faced the couch. "I need to tell you something that I probably should have told you years ago. Your father and I, we weren't happy for a long time before the affair. We stayed together because we thought it was best for you, because we thought we were protecting you from our problems." "You were," he said stubbornly. "No, honey, we weren't. We were teaching you that love looks like 2 people who barely speak to each other except to coordinate schedules. We were showing you that marriage means sleeping in the same house, but living completely separate lives. We were modeling a relationship where there's no joy, no affection, no real partnership." I could see him processing this, his certainty wavering slightly. "The affair was just the final straw," I continued. "It wasn't the cause of our problems. It was the symptom. And yes, I could have stayed. I could have pretended not to know, could have kept playing the role of the happy wife while your father lived his double life. But what would that have taught you about self-respect? About what you should accept in your own relationship someday?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "But look where it got you. Look where we are now." "You're right," I said. "Look where we are. I'm 52, starting over completely. It's terrifying and humbling, and sometimes I cry myself to sleep on this very couch. But I'm also free. For the first time in decades, I'm making choices based on what I want, what I believe is right, not just what's convenient or safe. That conversation didn't fix everything overnight, but it was the beginning of something new between us. Over the next few weeks, Michael started asking more questions about the divorce, about what those final years of marriage had really been like. I told him about the nights I'd lie awake feeling completely alone, even though his father was right next to me. I told him about the slow erosion of my confidence, how I'd gradually stopped voicing my opinions or pursuing my interests because it was easier to keep peace than to rock the boat. But I also made a decision that night. I was done being comfortable with discomfort. I was done accepting less than I deserved just to avoid conflict or difficulty. The next morning, I applied for every job I was qualified for, regardless of the salary. I applied for positions that were starting points rather than endpoints. I stopped looking for a job that would immediately restore my old lifestyle and started looking for work that would help me build a new one. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 interviews. Within a month, I had a job offer. It was for a marketing coordinator position at a small non-profit, less than half what I'd made 15 years earlier. But it was a start. That first job was humbling. I was working alongside people who could have been my children, learning software I'd never used, adapting to workplace cultures that had evolved completely during my absence from the workforce. But something amazing happened. I remembered why I'd loved marketing in the first place. The creativity, the problem-solving, the satisfaction of connecting people with things that could genuinely help them. I'd forgotten that work could be fulfilling rather than just a means to an end. My relationship with Michael started changing too. Once I moved into my own tiny studio apartment, and yes, it was smaller than some people's closets, but it was mine. He began visiting me. At first, it was just to check that I was okay, but gradually, our conversations became deeper, more honest. He started sharing things about his own life, his fears about relationships, his concerns about following in his father's footsteps. We talked about what healthy love actually looks like, about the difference between commitment and settling, about how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said one evening about 6 months later. We were sitting in my little apartment, eating takeout Chinese food on my second-hand couch. "I'm sorry for what I said about staying married. I was angry and scared, and I took it out on you." "You were protecting yourself," I told him. "Change is scary, even when it's necessary. Even when it's ultimately good for everyone involved." Here's where the story takes a turn that I never could have predicted. About 8 months into my new job, the nonprofit I was working for partnered with a larger marketing firm on a major campaign. I was assigned to be the liaison between our organizations. The campaign was for a divorce support organization. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were tasked with creating resources for people going through divorce, particularly focusing on financial planning and emotional support for individuals starting over later in life. As I worked on this campaign, I realized I had insights that went far beyond marketing strategy. I'd lived this experience. I knew what it felt like to stare at a bank statement and realize you had no idea how you were going to afford next month's rent. I knew the shame of having to ask for help, the fear of job interviews after years out of the workforce, the complexity of rebuilding relationships with adult children who blamed you for disrupting their sense of security. I started incorporating these real experiences into our marketing materials, not my personal story specifically, but the emotional journey that so many people face. The campaign was incredibly successful, but more importantly, it helped me realize that my experience, as painful as it had been, had value. That campaign led to other opportunities. I started speaking at workshops for people going through divorce, sharing practical advice about job hunting, apartment searching, and rebuilding credit. But I also talked about the emotional side, how to handle the shame, how to maintain relationships with children who might be angry about the divorce, how to rediscover who you are outside of a marriage that defined you for decades. The speaking led to consulting work, which led to writing opportunities. I started a blog about life after divorce, focusing on the practical and emotional challenges of starting over in midlife. The blog grew into a small business, offering coaching services and resource guides. 3 years later, I'm not just financially stable. I'm financially independent. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. I have work that feels meaningful, relationships that are honest and supportive, and a sense of myself that isn't dependent on anyone else's approval or presence. But the most important change has been in my relationship with Michael. We're closer now than we ever were when I was married. He sees me as a complete person rather than just his mother. He respects the choices I've made, even when they've been difficult or scary. Last month, Michael called me with news. He'd been offered a promotion that would require him to relocate across the country. It was an amazing opportunity, but he was hesitant to take it. "Why?" I asked him. "I don't want to leave you here alone," he said. "What if you need help? What if something happens?" I smiled, even though he couldn't see me through the phone. "Michael, do you remember what you told me 3 years ago about comfort?" "Mom, I was." "You were right," I interrupted. "Not about staying married, but about comfort." I had gotten too comfortable with discomfort. I'd accepted a life that was safe, but not satisfying, secure, but not fulfilling. When I lost that false security, I was forced to build something real. "So, you think I should take the job?" "I think you should take the opportunity that excites you most. I think you should make choices based on what will help you grow, not what will keep you comfortable. And I think you should stop worrying about me. I've learned how to take care of myself, and it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. Here's what I want you to understand if you're watching this and facing your own impossible situation. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that happens to you. I'm not going to tell you that divorce is easy or that starting over in midlife is fun. It's terrifying and lonely, and there are days when you'll question every decision you've made. There are nights when you'll lie awake wondering if everyone else was right, if you should have just stayed comfortable with your discomfort. But here's what I know now that I didn't know then. You are capable of so much more than you realize. The skills you think you've lost are still there, waiting to be rediscovered. The strength you think you lack has been building quietly in the background of every challenge you've already survived. The people who love you might not understand your choices at first. They might even be angry with you for disrupting their sense of security. But if you make decisions from a place of integrity rather than fear, if you choose growth over comfort, those relationships will ultimately become stronger and more authentic. For anyone facing a similar situation, let me share some practical things I learned. First, don't let pride keep you from accepting help, but also don't let help become a permanent crutch. There's a difference between needing support while you rebuild and becoming dependent on that support. Second, when you're job hunting after a long absence from the workforce, focus on the skills you've maintained rather than the gap in your resume. Volunteer work, managing a household, supporting a spouse's career. These all require transferable skills that employers value. Third, be honest with your adult children about why you made the choices you made, but don't make them your therapists. They need to process their own feelings about your divorce, and that's not your responsibility to manage. Fourth, start small, but start somewhere. You don't have to immediately rebuild the lifestyle you had before. You need to build a foundation that's actually yours, even if it's smaller than what you're used to. And finally, remember that comfort isn't the enemy. False comfort is. True comfort comes from living authentically, from making choices that align with your values, from building a life that feels genuinely yours, rather than one that just looks acceptable from the outside. So yes, my son was right about one thing. I should have thought more carefully about comfort, but not in the way he meant it at the time. I should have been uncomfortable with my discomfort sooner. I should have questioned why I was accepting a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement. I should have wondered why I was sacrificing my growth and happiness for the illusion of security. The couch in my son's apartment wasn't the lowest point of my life. It was the launching pad. It was the place where I finally stopped making excuses and started making changes. It was where I learned that my relationship with my son could survive honesty, that I could survive uncertainty, and that starting over isn't the same thing as giving up. Today, I have a home that's truly mine, work that fulfills me, and relationships built on authenticity rather than convenience. I have a son who respects me not just as his mother, but as a woman who made difficult choices with integrity. And I have something I didn't have in my marriage. I have myself. The woman I was before I became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's idea of who I should be. She was there all along, just waiting for me to be brave enough to let her emerge. If you're on someone's couch right now, literally or metaphorically, wondering if you made the right choice in leaving your comfort zone, I want you to know the discomfort is temporary, but the growth is permanent. The fear is real, but so is your strength. And sometimes, the best thing someone can do for you is refuse to let you stay comfortable with a life that's smaller than you deserve. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between security and authenticity? Have you ever had someone question your decision to leave a comfortable but unfulfilling situation? What advice would you give to someone facing that choice right now? And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, someone who's facing their own impossible choice between comfort and growth, please share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we're stronger than we think we are. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about finding strength in unexpected places, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. I share new videos every Tuesday and Friday, and I read every single comment. Thank you for listening to my story, for being part of this community, and for believing that it's never too late to start over. I'll see you in the next video. Remember, comfort isn't the goal. Growth is. And sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need.